let's move forward. Akshay?
Thanks, Leo. So I'll just introduce myself. My name is Akshay Dosaj. I'm the co-managing director of Purple Honey Group. Purple Honey Group was founded in April 2010. So we've just completed 10 years as a group. Mm-hmm. We have 8 physical restaurants, from quick service, casual dining, fine dining, Indian, Lebanese, and we have 5 dark kitchens operating at the moment. We're currently trading under 5 different brands. The brands that are probably most known to everyone in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, there's a brand called Tamba, which is Indian fine dining. And we've got a brand called Biryani Pot, which is Indian quick service food. Coriander is casual dining. And we have Lebanese under Zaitinia, and we have 2 dark kitchen brands as well. So what I'm going to talk about today is similar to George, considerations and what to think about when reopening after this lockdown. And I'm going to split my sort of talk into 3 key stages. Number 1 is the initial considerations that all operators should be thinking about right now and before they open. 2, I'm going to split the considerations into the 4 key stakeholders that we all have as restaurant owners and operators. And those stakeholders are our staff, our suppliers, our landlords, and to some extent, if you have bank debt, our banks. And then the last piece I'll close with is being prepared. So I am a big believer in hoping for the best, preparing for the worst. And I'll talk a little bit about that at the end. And just so people understand, I spent over a decade as a corporate finance lawyer practicing mergers and acquisitions and joint ventures. So I will not be giving legal advice, but I will be advising with that hat on as well. So please don't go out and act upon my advice as a lawyer, but I'm just sharing some thoughts on that. So to get started, the initial considerations that we all need to do are, let's get clarity. There's been a lot of conversation, a lot of messages that restaurants are allowed to reopen, they're not allowed to reopen. What are the rules and regulations do we have to, to adhere to? I think the key before relaunching is to get clarity, send out your own PROs or speak to people that you trust, understand what the rules are from the DED, the municipality, food control authority. Let's get that clarity. I, for one, have sent my PRO out to get these answers directly from the sources, because at the moment there is uncertainty. The next thing I think that's the most important question really right now is it the right time for your restaurant, your brand, to reopen for dine-in sales? Now, if you're a standalone brand, maybe on a high street, somewhere in, say, Jumeirah Beach Road, or if you do not have a mall landlord, you will be able to make that decision and you will have that control to maybe stay closed. Some of us who've got mall operations as well may not have that ability. Your leases may require you to reopen in line with the mall opening. Now, on that basis, I think you need to think about, if you're going to reopen, do you expect to get customers straight away? And I think it's quite clear that the answer to that is no. You might have an example like we saw with Mergedigans, where suddenly people are coming out. But for most of us, you are not going to get the dine-in customers back that you've seen before COVID. Let's not forget that on top of COVID, we are also right at the start of Ramadan. So even in a pre-COVID world, Ramadan was a time that dine-in sales were significantly reduced for the majority of operators. So keep that in mind and really analyze how much you're forecasting in terms of dine-in. And the reason that's important is to think about your staffing. You don't want to get your full 100% staffing straight back and they're all just standing there waiting for customers to come in. That doesn't help your cash flow. That certainly doesn't help staff morale. So think about that. My suggestion would be to start with the same or very lean staffing as you've had during the lockdown period. if you're just doing deliveries. Certainly that's an approach we are taking, and we're going to be monitoring on a week-to-week basis to see how the numbers ramp up. Do a cost-benefit analysis. This is the additional cost that will be associated with reopening for full dine-in, staff, extra supplies, maybe those are the main two, but will that be covered by the additional revenue that you're hoping to get from dine-in sales? And that simple analysis can be done. I think it's important to think locally. If you are an operator, an owner of multiple locations, like myself, there may well be that certain locations are more suited to reopening right now than others. For example, a restaurant that's located in a highly office dense area where we're expecting office workers to be back at work, those locations may be more suited to reopening for dine-in than a restaurant in a mall food court, for example. But think about those things in the context of your operations. That's very, very important. And there are just some sort of housekeeping, simple things, which I'm sure everyone here will be doing. But if you are opening, make sure all your staff are COVID tested. Have everyone that's re-entering your restaurant be fit and healthy to be there. Remember, you've got a duty to protect not only your customer, but also your staff. And that's very important. Make sure you've got enough PPE and hygiene equipment for them so that they are healthy, and make sure that your customers see all the measures that you're taking to maintain all these hygiene levels. The next thing I think that's important to think about is what can you do at the relaunch phase? I am strongly of the belief that at this stage, a large discount for people to come and dine is not necessary and not appropriate. Reason being, those that are, I'll use the word brave enough to re-enter the malls and feel comfortable, they will be going regardless. And those that are not going to be enticed by a 20, 30, or even a 50% discount on a 50 dirham meal. It's not going to trap them in. So all you're going to achieve by giving a discount is you will just cut away from your bottom line. So don't do discounts, but do look at other offers that you can do. Do look at launching potentially new dishes in light of this arena that we're in. Look at ways of getting your message out, reaching out to some of your customers and telling them that we are reopened. An approach I'll be taking from one of my fine dining outlets is to contact our loyal customers, tell them what we're doing, tell them about new offers, tell them about our hygiene, make them comfortable. So those are the kind of high-level preparedness measures that I think one should take. Then coming on to the second part, which is the stakeholders. The first of the stakeholders that's important to consider are staff. And I have touched on this in the beginning, but make sure they're tested for COVID. Get all the PPE equipment ready for them. Ensure your hygiene levels are clear internally to your senior management and to every member of staff so that you're all rowing in the same direction, because there will be a lot of checks that will be happening from the government authorities. And the last thing any of us need right now is a fine or to be closed down again. Ensure that you've got the cash flow to meet the additional salary requirement that will come. And this is dependent on what measures you have taken as an operator. Perhaps you've put staff on unpaid leave, perhaps you've sent them home, but there will likely be an additional strain on cash flow from adding staff. So make sure you've got your cash flow aligned, and think about whether you can make do without some of the more expensive senior staff, or maybe they can come in on infrequent bases. Also look at, maybe you can change your menu. Perhaps it's not the right time to get the full menu relaunched, and that would possibly and hopefully translate into lower staffing in the kitchen. Okay. Lastly, with the staff, I think it's very key at this time to make sure that they are motivated and inspired. And as owners and operators, I think that really lands on us to act almost as father figures to our teams and give them that comfort and assurance. Because demotivated staff is a bigger killer to our brands than even the aggregators would be. Next is on to the landlords. I'm sure all of us here have already started it, but if you have not, it's time to start getting ready for the landlord rent negotiations. You know, Where you have large corporate landlords, it may be easier to get rent reductions. Where you've got smaller independent landlords, it might not be so easy. But an approach that I take is always to set out a clear email showing the loss we suffered, showing what we project, and showing what you are and are not able to pay. If you've got PDC checks in the market, regardless of whatever everyone says that a bounce check is not an issue anymore, my opinion is you do not want to be bouncing checks. It's the last thing you want to do. So try your best to ensure you have the funds and the cash flow to meet those checks as they fall due. And if not, stay in touch with landlords and ask them for deferments or to hold certain checks being encashed until a time that you've got the cash flow. And I think only an unreasonable landlord will not recognize this requirement in light of where we are. The next piece with landlords, and this is something I think you have to, everyone has their own negotiating style, but I've seen from almost 20 years of negotiations, both as a lawyer and as an operator of restaurants, it's best to be polite, be clear, explain to the landlord what is the consequence of them not supporting you. And the consequence ultimately is that you will close down. Now, depending on your corporate structure, the landlord may walk away with nothing if that happens, because there's what's known in any kind of bankruptcy situation as a priority payment waterfall. So the employees will be the first that would be paid out from any cash flow you've got, and it would subsequently go down there to secured creditors, unsecured creditors, trade creditors. And the landlord would be one of the last that would get paid out. And ultimately, depending on the size of your operation, understand that if you're an LLC, you have certain legal protections. The meaning of LLC, limited liability company, means the responsibility of the shareholder is limited to his or her share capital. Normally in the UAE, that's around 150,000 dirhams. That's what most LLCs onshore have. So think about those things. And those sort of last negotiation points I meant with landlords actually apply to all your stakeholders. You know, certainly with suppliers that will apply as well, to take them through this journey, because they may not understand or may not want to understand it. With suppliers, ensure that you're open with them. That's what we found. They understand that it's a very challenging time, but they've also got businesses to run and they also have liabilities. So open communication, I felt, is best. Try to agree payment plans where possible. One thing one could do, and we've tried this some ways successfully, some unsuccessfully, is to offer to pay the most recent supply immediately. So in April, we took the step of, in the majority of our suppliers, to pay for the March supplies, rather than going back to 60 or 90 days, which would be your payment terms. If you do have PDCs, again, like with landlords, please make sure that you've got the cash flow to meet those PDCs. And be prepared. Some suppliers may not work with you. Be prepared that you may have to cut those suppliers off for now and bring on alternative suppliers, both on credit or on a cash basis. So have that back office work done. That's very important. My last bit is to do with banks. And some of you will have bank debt. I have bank debt. Negotiate banking payment moratoriums with your banks. And what I mean by that is a freeze period where you're not paying the capital installment and the interest payments. And certainly there has been a lot of coverage in the press that banks are looking at this. From experience, there are some banks that are better at recognizing this and some that are worse. I think the large government-owned banks are trying to support. So have those conversations as quickly as possible to try to ease your cash flow. Now, if you do get an agreement, please make sure that it's in writing, at the least on email communication, and understand what it implies, because 99% it will not simply be that we will not charge you installments for 6 months. They will be charging interest on that freezing of installments. So understand what the actual payment will be, because you may end up with a bit of a shock at the end of your tenure at the extension where you have large interest payments which are still to be made. Then it brings on to my final closing remarks, which is hope for the best, prepare for the worst. I'm sure most people, most sensible operators will have done this, but have a 12-month cash flow projection in place. Understand what you can control in terms of outflows, what you can't control, which stakeholders you can manage, which you can't. Unfortunately, we're in an environment where increasing revenue is highly difficult. But we can control the other stakeholders, the payments that we make out. That's something to build in. Where you do see cash flow gaps and negative cash flow, you need to immediately understand how you're going to address that. Or either that is funding from a bank, equity injections from you as an owner operator. You need to know where that money is going to come from. Prepare a list of all your financial exposures. And what I mean by that is, for each restaurant or each brand that you've got, know what dues you have, both in terms of PDCs in the market and in terms of upcoming payments. And your main payments will be rent, supplier outstandings, bank installments, salaries. And in salaries, there is also end of service and final settlement amounts. If you were to go bankrupt, those will need to be paid. Understand, and please take legal advice on this, where your liability sits. As an owner operator, your liability will sit largely in 2 or 3 areas. Number one, it will be as a shareholder. If you've got a limited liability company, shareholder liability is limited to your share capital. That's the 150,000 that I mentioned. That you are personally liable for. You will also have liability, coming back to this, if you're an establishment, you are personally liable in the same way as the trading entity, 100%. Your house, your car, everything is exposed and will be sold off to raise money to clear your debts. So you have to be aware of that. Secondly, you have liability as a manager. That is on the trade license. In Dubai, the manager is listed on the trade license. In Abu Dhabi, that's not the case, other than in some very limited situations. Managers, in certain circumstances, and please check this, but if your assets are 20% or less than your liabilities, then as a manager, you can be personally liable. So ensure that you understand the legal liability as a manager. And the last piece, really, where there's a lot of liability, would be at Ministry of Labour. Ministry of Labour salaries and dues can become criminal liability if it's not dealt with. So with all of these pieces, like I said at the beginning, please don't take this as legal advice. Just take this as a guidance and go out and get legal advice on these points. If you feel you're at risk of bankruptcy, you may have to spend a little bit of money, but being prepared and being forearmed will give you a lot better roadmap and comfort for the future. So that's all I've got to say. I apologize, I've gone on a little more than my 10 minutes, but I hope that what I said is of use to those listening.
Thank you, Akshay. There is one question about post-dated checks signed by individuals. So how to tackle such kind of cases?
Okay, so again, my first answer to that would be get legal advice.
Mm-hmm.
But from what I understand, with post-dated or any checks in the UAE, the signatory of the check is the one that is responsible. So a bouncing of the check, the signatory will be held responsible. Now, with a bounce check, there are 2 streams. There's the criminal liability and the civil liability. The civil liability is the commercial liability of not honoring a payment. That is on the company. But the criminality of writing a check which does not clear, that is on the individual that signed it. But again, please get legal advice. This is only a very high level feedback that I'm giving.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't see any more questions. Yeah, so, but anyway, now you know that we have a very experienced legal advisor in the community. Maybe not legal advisor as a legal advisor, but who can advise what to do, or like in which way better.
On that, I'd be more than happy if people do have questions. I've been in this game quite a long time, both as a lawyer and as a restaurateur. I've seen good times, I've seen tough times. So certainly if someone just wants to reach out and throw ideas around, I'd be more than happy, and I'm happy for people to reach out to me personally. Where I know 100% the answer, I will say that. But most of the time, my advice would be listen to me, but please go and seek proper advice from a lawyer so that you're sure about the future.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much. It was quite useful. I also, as a manager and owner of my company, now understand that my liability is a little bit more maybe than I thought. Yeah, but it's okay. It's very, very...
But Leo, things can be done to restructure yourself to protect against that.
Yeah.
I think every one of us should be thinking about those things.
Yeah, regarding how to reach Akshay or Olga, please message to Slack and tag Akshay for everybody to be able to message him.